Maria Santos sat in the back row of the graduation ceremony, her weathered hands folded tightly in her lap. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the community college auditorium, casting long shadows across the rows of proud families. She had chosen this spot deliberately, far from the front where other parents sat with cameras and bouquets of flowers. Maria preferred the shadows, the quiet corners where she could watch her son Carlos receive his diploma without drawing attention to herself. At 52, Maria had learned the art of becoming invisible. Years of cleaning office buildings at night and working double shifts at the local diner had taught her how to move through the world without making waves. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore her only good dress, a navy blue one she had bought from a thrift store 3 years ago for her daughter's quinceañera. The fabric was starting to show wear, but it was clean and pressed, and that was what mattered. Carlos stood with his graduating class on the stage, his cap slightly askew and his gown wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. Maria's heart swelled with pride as she watched him. He was the first person in their family to graduate from college, even if it was just a 2-year associate degree in automotive technology. To Maria, it might as well have been a doctorate from Harvard. She remembered the day Carlos was born, 22 years ago, in a crowded emergency room in East Los Angeles. She had been alone then, too, her husband Miguel having left 6 months earlier when he learned about the pregnancy. The doctors had told her Carlos might not survive his first night due to complications from his premature birth. But Maria had sat beside his tiny incubator, whispering prayers in Spanish and promising God that if her son lived, she would do everything in her power to give him opportunities she never had. The promise had cost her dearly. Maria dropped out of high school when Carlos was 2 to work more hours and support her small family. She never married again, despite several proposals over the years. Every spare dollar went toward Carlos's education, his books, his school supplies, and, later, his community college tuition. She worked cleaning jobs that paid cash under the table so she could avoid the paperwork that might complicate their lives. Because Maria Santos had a secret that she had kept hidden for over 2 decades. A secret that was permanently etched into her skin, hidden beneath the long sleeves she always wore, even on the hottest summer days in Southern California. On her left shoulder, partially hidden by the strap of her bra, was a tattoo that few people had ever seen. It was a small but detailed image of an eagle perched on an anchor, surrounded by a rope border with the word Semper Fi inscribed below. Most people, if they saw it, might assume it belonged to an ex-boyfriend or husband. They would be wrong. Maria had earned that tattoo during 8 years of service in the United States Marine Corps, from 1992 to 2000. She had been deployed to Somalia, Bosnia, and Kuwait. She had trained in combat operations, earned expert marksmanship badges, and received commendations for her service. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been a force to be reckoned with in her military days, respected by her peers and feared by her enemies. But that was before Carlos, before she chose to disappear into the shadows of civilian life to protect the most important mission she had ever undertaken, raising her son as an undocumented immigrant in America. The irony was not lost on her. She had sworn an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, had served her country with distinction, and had bled on foreign soil for the flag that flew over this very graduation ceremony. Yet she lived in constant fear of deportation, working jobs that paid below minimum wage and avoiding any situation that might require her to produce identification documents. Maria's immigration status was complicated in ways that most people could never understand. She had been born in Mexico but brought to the United States as a young child by parents who overstayed their tourist visas. When she joined the Marines at 18, she had used documents that she believed were legitimate but later discovered were fraudulent. The military had never questioned her status during her 8 years of service, but when she tried to formalize her citizenship after leaving the Corps, she discovered that her original entry into the country had been illegal. The immigration lawyer she consulted had explained that her situation was a legal nightmare. While her military service should have provided a path to citizenship, the fraudulent documents she had unknowingly used complicated everything. The process could take years, cost thousands of dollars she didn't have, and there was no guarantee of success. Worse, pursuing it might draw attention to her undocumented status and result in immediate deportation. So Maria made the hardest decision of her life. She chose to disappear into the underground economy, to live as a shadow, to sacrifice her own identity to protect her son's future. Carlos had been born on American soil, he was a citizen with rights and opportunities that she might never have. She would not let her complicated past jeopardize his bright future. The ceremony continued, and Maria watched as the dean of students began calling names. The families around her cheered and took pictures as their loved ones crossed the stage. Maria wished she could be like them, wished she could stand up and shout with pride when Carlos's name was called. But drawing attention to herself was a luxury she could not afford. "Carlos Miguel Santos," the dean announced, and Maria's heart nearly burst. Her son walked across the stage with confidence, shaking hands with the college president and receiving his diploma. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded auditorium, and Carlos smiled directly at her. It was worth everything, all the sacrifice, all the fear, all the sleepless nights working multiple jobs to pay for his education. As the ceremony wound down and families began to gather for photos and celebrations, Maria prepared to slip away quietly. She had learned over the years that the best way to avoid awkward questions was to leave before anyone could approach her. Carlos understood, they had discussed this many times. He would celebrate with his friends, and she would wait for him at home with his favorite meal prepared. But, as she stood to leave, adjusting the sleeves of her dress to ensure her tattoo remained hidden, she noticed someone watching her from across the aisle. A tall man in a dress blue uniform, obviously military by his bearing and the crisp way he held himself. He had silver hair and kind eyes, and something about the way he looked at her made her uncomfortable. Maria quickened her pace toward the exit, but the crowd was thick with celebrating families. She found herself moving slowly, trapped among groups of people taking pictures and sharing congratulations. The man in uniform seemed to be moving in her direction, though she told herself it was probably just a coincidence. Near the exit, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. Maria turned around to find the uniformed man standing behind her, his expression respectful but curious. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a voice that carried authority but also warmth. "I'm Commander James Richardson, United States Navy SEALs. I couldn't help but notice." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been watching you during the ceremony, and something about your bearing, the way you carry yourself, it reminded me of someone." Maria's throat went dry. This was exactly the kind of attention she had spent years trying to avoid. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said quietly, avoiding his eyes and preparing to turn away. "Maybe," Commander Richardson said. "But I've been in the military for 30 years, and I've learned to recognize a fellow warrior when I see one. The way you stand, the way you scan a room, the discipline in how you present yourself even when you're trying to blend in. These are things that can't be faked or forgotten." Maria felt panic rising in her chest. She needed to get away from this conversation, away from this man who seemed to see too much. "I really need to go," she said, taking a step toward the door. "Of course," the commander said, stepping aside. "I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. I just wanted to say that whoever you are, wherever you've served, your sacrifice hasn't gone unnoticed. And, congratulations on your son's graduation. You should be very proud." As Maria hurried toward the parking lot, her mind raced. How had he known? What had given her away? She had been so careful for so many years to suppress every military instinct, to slouch instead of standing at attention, to avoid the bearing that had been drilled into her during boot camp and reinforced through years of service. But, apparently, some things couldn't be hidden, no matter how hard you tried to bury them. In her car, Maria sat for several minutes trying to calm her racing heart. She looked in the rearview mirror at the graduation ceremony still going on behind her, at the families celebrating their children's achievements in the bright California sunshine. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to be one of those parents, to stand proudly in the front row, to have her picture taken with Carlos, to not have to hide who she really was. The moment passed, and Maria started her car. She had a celebration dinner to prepare, and Carlos would be home soon, glowing with the pride of his achievement. That was what mattered now. Not the past, not the secrets she carried, not the recognition she had glimpsed in a stranger's eyes. But, as she drove home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. For the first time in 20 years, someone had seen through her carefully constructed invisibility. Someone had recognized the warrior she used to be, hidden beneath the mask of the anonymous immigrant worker she had become. And, despite her fear, despite the danger it might represent, there was a small part of her that felt relief at being seen, even for just a moment, for who she really was. Carlos arrived home 3 hours later, still wearing his graduation gown and carrying a small bouquet of flowers that his girlfriend Jessica had given him. Maria had spent the time preparing his favorite meal, mole poblano with handmade tortillas, rice and beans, and tres leches cake for dessert. The small apartment smelled like home, filled with the aromas of cumin, chocolate, and cinnamon that had marked every celebration in their family for as long as Carlos could remember. "Mommy, you should have stayed for pictures," Carlos said as he hugged her tightly. "Professor Martinez asked where you went. I think he wanted to meet you." Maria smiled and touched his face, noting how much he looked like his father at that age. "Today was about you, Nijo. I was there to see you graduate, and that's what mattered to me." They sat down to eat, and Carlos talked excitedly about his plans for the future. He had already secured a job at a local automotive repair shop that specialized in high-end European cars. The owner had promised to help him get certified in hybrid and electric vehicle repair, which was where the industry was heading. Carlos dreamed of eventually opening his own shop, maybe even expanding into custom modifications for racing cars. As Maria listened to her son's dreams, she felt the familiar mixture of pride and sadness that had marked so many moments of his childhood. Pride because Carlos had accomplished so much despite the obstacles they faced. Sadness because she couldn't share in his success the way other mothers could. She couldn't post photos on social media, couldn't tell stories about him to coworkers, couldn't even put his graduation picture on her refrigerator for fear that the wrong person might see it and ask questions. "Mommy, are you okay?" Carlos asked, noticing her distant expression. "You seem worried about something." Maria forced a smile. "Just thinking about how proud I am of you. You've worked so hard for this day." But Carlos knew his mother better than anyone. He had inherited her ability to read people, to sense when something was wrong beneath the surface. "Did something happen at the graduation? You left so quickly." Maria hesitated. She had never lied to Carlos about important things, but she had also never told him the complete truth about her past. He knew she was undocumented, knew that was why she worked the job she did and why they had to be careful about certain things. But he didn't know about her military service, didn't know that his mother had once been Staff Sergeant Santos, that she had combat experience and specialized training, that she had given up not just a country but an entire identity for his sake. "There was a man there," she said carefully. "Military. He seemed to think he recognized me from somewhere." Carlos frowned. "What kind of military? Did you know him?" "No, I don't think so. He was Navy, a SEAL commander. He said something about the way I carried myself. Made me nervous." "Well, you do have good posture," Carlos said with a grin. "Maybe he thought you were former military or something." The comment hit closer to home than Carlos could have known, and Maria changed the subject quickly. "Tell me more about this job. When do you start?" The next few days passed normally. Maria returned to her routine of working at the diner during the day and cleaning offices at night. Carlos started his new job and came home each evening full of stories about the cars he was working on and the new techniques he was learning. For a while, Maria allowed herself to believe that the encounter with Commander Richardson had been an isolated incident, a moment of bad luck that wouldn't be repeated. She was wrong. On Thursday evening, as Maria finished her shift at Gonzalez Construction Services, cleaning the offices and conference rooms in their downtown building, she was startled to find someone waiting by her car in the parking garage. It was Commander Richardson, no longer in uniform but wearing casual civilian clothes that somehow made him seem more approachable and more intimidating at the same time. "Please don't run," he said as soon as he saw the fear in her eyes. "I'm not here in any official capacity. I just want to talk." Maria's hand moved instinctively to her car keys, her mind calculating the distance to the security desk in the lobby. "How did you find me? How do you know where I work?" "I asked around," Richardson said honestly. "Your son is very proud of you." When I told him I was trying to reach you to thank you for your service, he told me where you worked. My service? Maria's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know what you're talking about. Richardson stepped closer, and Maria could see the kindness in his eyes alongside something else: recognition, respect, and, perhaps, understanding. Maria Santos, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 1992 to 2000. Deployed to Somalia with the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, Bosnia with the 26th MEU, and Kuwait with the 1st Marine Division. Expert rifleman, certified in urban warfare tactics, commended for valor under fire in Mogadishu. Maria felt the world spinning around her. Nobody should have known these details, not after 20 years of hiding. How, was all she could manage to say. I have friends in many places, Richardson said. And, when I see someone who carries themselves like a Marine, someone who has that particular bearing that comes from combat experience, I pay attention. It took me a few days, but I was able to trace your service record. Are you here to arrest me? Maria asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. After 20 years of running from this moment, she felt almost relieved that it had finally arrived. Arrest you? Richardson looked genuinely confused. For what? Serving your country with distinction? For being one of the finest Marines I've ever had the pleasure of reading about? For being here illegally, Maria said. For using false documents to enlist. For being undocumented. Richardson was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Is that why you've been hiding? Is that why one of the most decorated female Marines of your generation is working as a cleaning lady and living in the shadows? Maria nodded, unable to trust her voice. Sit down, Richardson said gently, gesturing to a concrete barrier near the parking spaces. Please. Let me tell you a story. Against her better judgment, Maria sat. Richardson settled beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. 25 years ago, I was a young SEAL lieutenant deployed to Central America. Our mission was to train local forces in counterinsurgency tactics. One night, our base was attacked by a much larger force than we had anticipated. We were outnumbered 3-1, low on ammunition, and cut off from extraction. Richardson paused, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline in the distance. A Marine unit happened to be conducting operations in the area. They received our distress call and diverted from their own mission to help us. The unit was led by a female staff sergeant who had to make a split-second decision: follow orders and continue with her assigned mission, or risk her career and her Marines to save a SEAL team she didn't know. Maria felt her breath catch. She remembered that night, remembered the radio call, remembered the decision that had haunted her for years afterward. That staff sergeant chose to help us, Richardson continued. She and her Marines fought their way through enemy lines, provided covering fire while we evacuated our wounded, and then fought their way back out again. 3 SEALs are alive today because of her decision, including me. He turned to look directly at Maria. I've spent 25 years wondering what happened to Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. I've looked for her in veteran databases, at Marine Corps reunions, through official channels. She seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth after leaving the Corps. Now I know why. Maria felt tears stinging her eyes. I made that decision because it was the right thing to do. Those were American servicemen in danger. My immigration status doesn't change that. No, it doesn't, Richardson agreed. But it explains why someone who should have been promoted to gunnery sergeant, someone who should have had a career in the military or in government service, someone who should be receiving veterans' benefits and living with honor instead of in hiding, why that person felt she had to disappear. They sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Richardson spoke again. I'm retired from active duty now, but I work with veterans organizations. I help former military personnel navigate bureaucratic systems, access benefits they've earned, deal with legal issues. I've seen cases like yours before, Maria. Undocumented immigrants who served with distinction and, then, fell through the cracks of a broken system. There's nothing that can be done, Maria said. I consulted a lawyer years ago. The fraudulent documents I used to enlist make everything complicated. It could take years, and there's no guarantee. Meanwhile, Carlos was growing up, and he needed me here, not fighting a legal battle that might end with me being deported.
Things have changed, Richardson said.
There are new programs, new pathways for veterans in situations like yours.
It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's possible. More importantly, you wouldn't have to do it alone.
Maria looked at him suspiciously.
Why would you help me? You don't even know me.
I know you saved my life, Richardson said simply.
I know you served with honor.
I know you sacrificed your own future for your son's education. I know you're living a lie not because you're trying to deceive anyone, but because you're trying to protect someone you love.
That's exactly the kind of person I want to help. And if it doesn't work? If the process draws attention and they deport me anyway? Carlos is just starting his career. He doesn't need that kind of disruption in his life.
Carlos is 22 years old and has a college degree, Richardson pointed out.
He's not a child anymore.
And, from what I can see, he's strong enough to handle whatever comes. He learned that strength from somewhere.
Maria considered this.
For 20 years, she had made every decision based on protecting Carlos, on ensuring his future was secure. But Carlos was an adult now, making his own way in the world. Maybe it was time to consider what she wanted for her own future.
What would you need from me? She asked. Documentation of your service record, which I can help you obtain.
A detailed statement about your immigration history and your reasons for enlisting.
Letters of recommendation from fellow veterans, which I can provide.
And, most importantly, the courage to step out of the shadows and reclaim your identity. Maria thought about the tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve, about the medal she kept in a shoebox in her closet, about the dreams she had given up so long ago. She thought about Carlos and how proud he had been at graduation, how he deserved a mother who could stand beside him in the light instead of watching from the shadows.
I need to think about it, she said. Of course, Richardson said, standing up.
But, Maria, you've been hiding for 20 years. At some point, you have to decide if you're going to keep running from who you are, or start fighting for who you could become again. As he walked away, leaving her alone in the parking garage, Maria realized that for the first time in 2 decades, she had a choice to make that wasn't entirely about Carlos. It was about her, about the woman she had been and the woman she might still become. The Marine in her, buried under years of fear and sacrifice, was starting to wake up.
Maria didn't sleep that night.
She lay in her small bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of her neighborhood, sirens in the distance, the hum of late-night traffic, the occasional argument from the apartment upstairs. These sounds had been the soundtrack of her life for 20 years, but tonight they seemed different somehow, as if she was hearing them from outside her own experience. At 3 a.m, she gave up trying to sleep and went to her closet. Behind her few good dresses and work uniforms, hidden in a corner where Carlos had never thought to look, was a small cardboard box. Maria rarely opened it, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she needed to remember who she had been before she became afraid. Inside the box were the remnants of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, her discharge papers, commendation letters, a few photographs from her deployments, and her service medals. She held her Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal in her palm, remembering the ceremony where she had received it for her actions in Bosnia. The ribbon had faded slightly, but the bronze star in the center still gleamed. There was also a letter she had never sent, written to her commanding officer just before she left the Corps. In it, she had tried to explain her decision to leave the military, her fears about her immigration status, and her gratitude for the 8 years of service that had been the proudest of her life. She had written it a dozen times but never found the courage to submit it. As she read her own words from 20 years ago, Maria realized how much anger she had been carrying. Not at the country she had served, not at the military that had given her purpose and identity, but at a system that had made her choose between her honor as a Marine and her love as a mother. She had been forced to abandon everything she was to protect everything she loved. The next morning, Carlos found her sitting at the kitchen table with the contents of the box spread in front of her. He had never seen any of these items before, and his eyes went wide as he took in the medals, the photographs of his mother in military uniform, the official documents with her name and rank. "Mommy, what is all this?" he asked, sitting down across from her.
Maria took a deep breath. It's time you knew the whole truth about your mother. For the next hour, Maria told Carlos everything.
She told him about enlisting in the Marines as a young woman, about her deployments and her service record. She told him about the documents she had unknowingly used, about discovering her precarious legal status, about the choice she had made to disappear rather than risk both their futures. Carlos listened without interruption, his expression cycling through surprise, pride, anger, and understanding. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "All these years," he said finally, "you let people treat you like you were nobody. You let them pay you nothing, respect you for nothing, see you as nothing. But you were a war hero." "I was a Marine," Maria said simply. "And Marines don't abandon their missions." "My mission became raising you." "But what about your mission to yourself?" Carlos asked. "What about your own life, your own dreams, your own future?" It was a question Maria had never allowed herself to consider. For 20 years, her future had been entirely defined by Carlos's needs, Carlos's education, Carlos's opportunities. She had never imagined a life beyond ensuring his success. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how to have dreams for myself." Carlos reached across the table and took her hand. "Then, maybe it's time to remember. Maybe it's time to stop hiding." That afternoon, Maria called the number Commander Richardson had given her. They met at a small cafe near the beach, far from her neighborhood and the places where she might be recognized. Richardson brought a briefcase full of documents and a laptop computer. "I've been doing some research," he said after they ordered coffee. "There have been significant changes in immigration law as it relates to military service. There's now a specific process for veterans who served without proper documentation, especially those who served in combat zones or received commendations." He opened his laptop and showed her a Department of Homeland Security website that outlined something called the Military Accessions Vital to National Interest Program, which had been expanded to include veterans seeking to regularize their status. "The process isn't simple," Richardson explained, "but your case is actually stronger than most. You have 8 years of honorable service, multiple deployments, and commendations for valor. More importantly, you've been a productive member of society for the 20 years since you left the military. You've raised an American citizen, paid taxes through your various jobs, and stayed out of trouble with law enforcement." Maria studied the documents he showed her. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the basic concept was clear: there was a path back to legitimacy, back to the life she had abandoned. "What's the downside?" she asked. "The process will take between 6 months and 2 years, Richardson said. During that time, your case will be under review, which means you'll be visible to immigration authorities. If something goes wrong, if they decide not to approve your application, you could face deportation. So I could lose everything." "Yes," Richardson said honestly. "But, Maria, you're already losing everything, just slowly. You're losing your identity, your dignity, your future. You're living as a ghost of who you really are." That evening, Maria cooked dinner for Carlos and told him about her meeting with Richardson. She spread the immigration documents on their small dining table, next to the Marine Corps memorabilia she had shared with him that morning. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Carlos looked at the 2 sets of documents, representing the 2 versions of his mother, the decorated Marine veteran and the undocumented immigrant worker. "I think you should stop asking what I need and start asking what you need. I need to know you'll be okay if something goes wrong. I'm 22 years old, Mommy. I have a job, an education, and a girlfriend who loves me. I've lived my whole life watching you sacrifice everything for me. Now I want to watch you fight for yourself." The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. 20 years of fear had made Maria forget what it felt like to move towards something instead of running away from it. But, as she held her old Marine Corps medals in one hand and the immigration paperwork in the other, she remembered what it felt like to be brave. The next morning, Maria called in sick to both her jobs. Instead of going to work, she took the bus downtown to the federal building where she would begin the process of reclaiming her life. Richardson met her there, along with an immigration lawyer he knew who specialized in veteran cases. The lawyer, Elena Vasquez, was a former Army officer who had left the military to focus on helping other veterans navigate legal challenges. She reviewed Maria's case with the thoroughness of a military briefing. "Your service record is exceptional," Vasquez said.
8 years of honorable service, multiple deployments, commendations for valor. You're exactly the kind of person this program was designed to help.
The challenge will be documenting your immigration history and proving that your original entry into the country was unintentional on your part. They spent 3 hours filling out forms, gathering documents, and preparing statements. Maria had to recount her entire life story multiple times, explaining how she had come to the United States as a child, how she had unknowingly used fraudulent documents to enlist, and how she had spent 20 years in legal limbo. The hardest part was writing a personal statement explaining why she wanted to regularize her status. After 2 decades of hiding, of making herself small and invisible, it was difficult to articulate what she hoped to gain by stepping into the light. "I want to stop being afraid," she wrote. "I want to visit my son's workplace without worrying that someone will ask for identification. I want to apply for jobs that match my skills and experience instead of jobs that pay cash under the table. I want to travel to see the country I served in uniform. I want to honor my military service instead of hiding it. I want to live as Maria Santos instead of as nobody." By the time they finished, it was late afternoon. Maria's hands were cramping from signing forms, and her head was spinning from all the information she had absorbed. As they walked out of the federal building, she felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we wait," Vasquez said. "Your application will be reviewed by multiple agencies. They'll verify your service record, investigate your background, and evaluate your case. It could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And, during that time? During that time, you're protected by the application process. As long as your case is pending, you can't be deported. You'll receive a work authorization document that will allow you to work legally while your case is being reviewed." Maria felt tears stinging her eyes. A work authorization document. Such a simple thing, but it represented freedom she hadn't had in 20 years. The freedom to work without fear, to apply for jobs openly, to build a life in the light instead of in the shadows. That night, Maria called her supervisor at the cleaning company and quit her job. She also called the diner and gave notice. For the first time in decades, she was making decisions based on what she wanted rather than what she was afraid of. Carlos found her sitting on their small balcony, looking out at the city lights. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified," Maria said honestly. "But, also, hopeful. For the first time in 20 years, I feel hopeful. The commander was right, wasn't he? About you being a warrior." Maria touched the tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve. Tomorrow, she thought, maybe she would wear a short-sleeved shirt. Maybe it was time to let people see who she really was. "Yes," she said. "I think maybe he was right." As mother and son sat together in the warm California evening, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 decades, the possibility of a future that belonged to her, not just to her fears. The application process would be long and uncertain, but, for the first time since Carlos was born, Maria Santos was moving forward instead of just surviving. The Marine in her, buried under years of hiding, was finally ready to rejoin the fight. 18 months later, Maria Santos stood in the same federal building where she had filed her immigration paperwork, but this time she was wearing her dress blue Marine Corps uniform. It was the same uniform she had worn for her discharge ceremony 22 years ago, carefully preserved in a garment bag and brought out of hiding for this momentous day. The fabric was still crisp, the brass buttons still gleamed, and the service ribbons on her chest told the story of 8 years of honorable service. Today was the day she would take the oath of citizenship. The journey had not been easy. There had been months of waiting, interviews with immigration officers, background checks that seemed to go on forever, and moments when Maria wondered if she had made a terrible mistake by stepping out of the shadows. But there had also been transformative moments that reminded her why the risk had been worthwhile. 6 months into the process, Maria had received her work authorization document. That small piece of plastic had changed everything. For the first time in 20 years, she could apply for jobs using her real name and qualifications. Within 2 weeks, she had been hired as a security supervisor at a technology company, a position that utilized her military experience and leadership skills. The pay was 3 times what she had been making as a cleaning lady, and her employers treated her with the respect she had forgotten she deserved. 3 months after that, she had enrolled in night classes to complete her GED and then begin working toward a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. At 54, Maria was discovering that it was never too late to have dreams for herself. The most difficult part of the process had been the interview with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Maria had to sit across a table from 2 federal agents and explain her entire life story, including the circumstances of her entry into the country as a child and her use of fraudulent documents to enlist in the Marines. She had expected judgment, suspicion, or hostility. Instead, she had found respect. Ms. Santos, one of the agents, had said after reviewing her file, "In 30 years of immigration law enforcement, I've never seen a case quite like yours. You served this country with distinction in multiple combat zones. You've raised an American citizen who is a productive member of society. You've worked and paid taxes for decades. The only reason you're sitting in this chair is because you were trying to protect your family. In my opinion, this country is better because you stayed." Now, as Maria prepared to take her citizenship oath, she reflected on how much had changed not just in her own life, but in her relationship with Carlos. For 20 years, their relationship had been defined by her need to protect him and his gratitude for her sacrifices. But, over the past 18 months, they had begun to relate to each other as adults, as equals, as 2 people building their own lives while remaining connected by love rather than dependence. Carlos had been promoted to lead technician at his repair shop and was engaged to Jessica, who had become like a daughter to Maria. They were planning a wedding for the following spring, and Carlos had asked Maria to walk him down the aisle since he had never known his father. It would be the first major family event where Maria could participate fully, openly, without fear. Commander Richardson sat in the front row of the naturalization ceremony, along with Carlos and Jessica. Over the past 18 months, Richardson had become more than just someone who had helped Maria with her immigration case. He had become a friend, a mentor, and something like the brother she had never had. Through him, Maria had connected with other veterans, had joined a support group for former military personnel dealing with various challenges, and had begun to rebuild the sense of community she had lost when she left the Corps. Elena Vasquez, the immigration lawyer who had guided Maria through the process, was also there. She had become another kind of friend, someone who understood both the legal complexities of Maria's situation and the emotional toll of living in limbo for so many years. But, perhaps the most meaningful presence in the audience was a group of 5 other veterans who were taking the citizenship oath alongside Maria. Richardson had connected her with other former service members who had found themselves in similar legal situations, and, together they had supported each other through the long process of regularizing their status. They had become a small military unit again, watching each other's backs and celebrating each other's victories. As the ceremony began, Maria thought about the tattoo on her shoulder, which was now visible above the collar of her dress blues. For 20 years, she had hidden that symbol of her service, afraid of what it might reveal about her. Now it was a source of pride, a visible reminder of who she was and what she had accomplished. The federal judge who would administer the oath was a dignified woman in her 60s who took time to speak personally to each new citizen. When she reached Maria, she paused to read the military information in her file. "Staff Sergeant Santos," the judge said, "I want to thank you for your service to this country, both in uniform and out of it. You've demonstrated the highest ideals of American citizenship through your actions, not just your legal status. It's an honor to welcome you home officially." The oath itself was simple but profound. As Maria raised her right hand and repeated the words, she felt the weight of 20 years of fear lifting from her shoulders. "I hereby declare, on oath, that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen." When she reached the words "that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic," Maria's voice caught slightly. She had spoken these words before, when she enlisted in the Marine Corps 30 years ago. But, this time, they carried a different meaning. This time, she was pledging allegiance not as someone running from her past, but as someone embracing her future. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the building's main lobby. Carlos approached his mother with tears in his eyes and embraced her tightly. "Mommy, you did it," he said. "You're finally free." "We're finally free," Maria corrected him. "Both of us." Commander Richardson presented Maria with a small gift, a new nameplate for her desk at work that read Maria Santos, United States citizen. It was a simple gesture, but it represented something enormous, the right to claim her identity openly and proudly. As the reception continued, Maria found herself in conversation with a young woman who had also taken the citizenship oath that day. The woman was from Somalia and had served as a translator for the U.S. Army in Afghanistan before coming to America as a refugee. Like Maria, she had faced legal challenges in regularizing her status despite her service to the country. "It's strange, isn't it?" the young woman said. "For so long, we've felt like we were asking for something we didn't deserve. But we weren't asking for a favor. We were claiming something we had already earned." Maria nodded, understanding completely. For 20 years, she had felt like an imposter, like someone who was pretending to belong in a country she had served in uniform. But today, she realized that citizenship wasn't just about legal documents or immigration status. It was about commitment, sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for ideals larger than yourself. She had been an American citizen in her heart long before she was one on paper. That evening, Maria, Carlos, Jessica, and Commander Richardson went to dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Los Angeles. It was the kind of place Maria had never felt comfortable entering during her years of hiding, partly because of the expense but mostly because of the fear that someone might ask for identification or question her presence. Now she walked in with confidence, wearing civilian clothes for the first time in months without feeling the need to hide or make herself invisible. The hostess greeted them warmly, and Maria realized that she was experiencing something she hadn't felt in decades, the simple pleasure of being treated as someone who belonged. Over dinner, Richardson shared some news that surprised everyone. "I've been offered a position with the Department of Veterans Affairs," he said. "They want me to develop a new program to help veterans who are facing immigration challenges." Apparently, cases like Maria's are more common than anyone realized, and the VA wants to be more proactive in helping former service members navigate these issues. "That's wonderful," Maria said. "How many veterans do you think are in situations like mine?" "We estimate there are thousands," Richardson said. "People who served honorably but fell through cracks in the immigration system. People who are living in the shadows despite their military service. People who deserve better from the country they served." Maria felt a familiar stirring, the same sense of mission and purpose she had experienced as a Marine. Would this program need people with experience in both military service and immigration law? Richardson smiled. "Are you interested?" "I'm 54 years old and just finishing my bachelor's degree," Maria said. "But, yes, I think I might be very interested." Carlos reached across the table and squeezed his mother's hand. "Look at you, planning your future instead of just surviving your present." As they walked back to their cars after dinner, Maria paused to look up at the Los Angeles skyline. The city lights stretched out in every direction, representing millions of people pursuing their dreams, building their lives, contributing to the community they all shared. For 20 years, Maria had felt like an outsider looking in, like someone watching life happen to other people while she remained hidden in the margins. Tonight, she felt like a full participant, someone with the right to dream and plan and hope for whatever came next. Commander Richardson approached her as she stood looking at the city. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About stepping out of the shadows?" "No," Maria said without hesitation. "But I do have one regret about the past 20 years. "What's that?" "I wish I had trusted this country to do the right thing sooner. I wish I had believed that my service meant something, that there were people like you and Elena who would fight for someone like me. I spent so much time being afraid of a system that ultimately worked the way it was supposed to." "Fear is understandable," Richardson said. "You had everything to lose." "But I also had everything to gain," Maria replied. "I just couldn't see it at the time." As they parted ways that night, Maria drove home through neighborhoods that looked familiar but felt different. These were the same streets she had traveled for 20 years, but now she was traveling them as a citizen, as someone who belonged, as someone who had reclaimed her name and her story. At home, Maria hung her dress blue uniform in the closet next to her civilian work clothes. Tomorrow, she would return to her job as a security supervisor. Next week, she would start the application process for graduate school. Next month, she would begin volunteering with an organization that helped other veterans navigate immigration challenges. But tonight, she simply sat on her balcony and looked out at the city lights, marveling at how different the view looked when you were no longer hiding from it. Maria Santos, United States citizen, decorated Marine veteran, mother, and woman with a future full of possibilities, was finally home.